Headline: 4-year-old street urchin sees millionaire tortured with hot spoon by employees. But what she does next shocks everyone. Watch until the end, you won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The Sunday sun beat down on the dusty streets of Harmony Creek, a small town in West Virginia where time seemed to have stood still since the 1980s. The faded clapboard houses contrasted sharply with the imposing mansion on the hilltop where Oswald Oz Fairbanks, at 58, had built his mining empire. His trembling hands held a coffee mug as he gazed out the window at the hills that had once brought him a fortune. On the cracked sidewalks, a small figure moved with the caution of someone who had learned to survive in the shadows. Lily, just 4 years old, clutched a tattered rag doll, her tangled blonde hair a painful contrast to her dirty clothes and gaunt face. Her bare feet knew every loose stone, every crack that could hurt her, as she searched for scraps of food in the town's dumpsters. The little girl didn't speak. She hadn't made a sound as long as she could remember, carrying a silence in her chest that weighed more than her constant hunger. Her big blue eyes captured everything around her with a disturbing intensity, as if trying to record every detail of a world that had abandoned her. That stifling afternoon, thirst led her to the gate of Oz Fairbanks' mansion. The manicured lawn contrasted brutally with her reality as a street child. Through the ornate wrought-iron gates, she could see a faucet near the back kitchen. Her parched lips begged for a few drops of water. With the agility of a child accustomed to hiding, Lily slipped through an opening in the side fence, the one the gardeners used to carry tools. Her silent steps led her to the back of the house, where the windows were open to ease the heat. That's when her life changed forever. Through the window of the main living room, her eyes witnessed a scene that would forever be etched in her childhood memory. 2 adults held Oz Fairbanks immobilized in a brown leather armchair. Rick, a skinny 35-year-old with scars on his face, held a metal spoon over the flames of the living room's wood-burning stove. Brenda, a 42-year-old woman with black hair and a cold stare, pressed the businessman's shoulders against the seat. "Where's the money, Oz?" Rick shouted, his voice filled with controlled rage. "You have 3 seconds to talk, or this spoon will leave another mark on your skin." The millionaire moaned in pain, sweat pouring down his pale face. There were already red welts on his arms, signs that the torture had been going on for hours. "I already told you, I don't have any money hidden in the house," he pleaded. "It's all in the banks, you know that." "Liar!" Brenda yelled, squeezing her fingers even harder on his shoulders. "We know you're hiding money here, enough to pay what you owe them." Lily remained paralyzed behind the window, her small fists clenched against her chest. She wanted to scream, call for help, do something, but her voice remained locked somewhere deep in her throat. Silent tears streamed down her dirty cheeks as she watched the cruelty. Rick brought the glowing spoon closer to Oz's arm again. The smell of burning flesh reached Lily, making her stomach churn. The businessman let out a desperate scream that echoed through the walls of the empty mansion. "Everyone is off today." Brenda laughed maliciously. "No one will hear you here." "You better start telling the truth." Little Lily recoiled instinctively, tripping over a potted plant. The noise made Rick look towards the window, but she had already hidden behind a tree. Her heart was beating so hard she was afraid they could hear it. "What was that?" Brenda asked, irritated by the interruption. "I thought I heard something," Rick muttered, approaching the window. "Must have been some animal." Lily remained still, clutching her doll, while the voices continued from inside the house. Oz begged for mercy, but his torturers seemed determined to extract information he swore he didn't have. When she finally managed to get away from the window, the girl ran as fast as her small legs would allow. Her childish mind struggled to process what she had witnessed. That man was suffering, he needed help, but she couldn't even utter a whisper. The streets of the town passed by in a blur as she ran, carrying a terrible secret inside her that no one would be able to understand through her desperate gestures. 3 days had passed since Lily witnessed the terrible scene at the mansion. The image of Oz being tortured repeated constantly in her mind, mixing with the confused fragments of other memories she couldn't fully understand. She slept badly, waking up in the middle of the night with her body trembling, clutching her rag doll, which was her only companion. Hunger gnawed at her more than usual. The owners of the bakery on Main Street had grown tired of chasing her away when she tried to grab leftovers, and now she didn't even approach the establishment anymore. Her last meals consisted of half-rotten fruit that fell from the trees and dirty water collected from puddles formed by the previous night's rain. On Wednesday morning, a need stronger than fear pushed her back to the hilltop where Oz's mansion was located. Maybe she would find something in the house's trash, since rich people always threw good food away. Her sore feet led her again along the same path, but this time something was different. The mansion seemed strangely silent, no movement in the windows, no sound coming from inside. The manicured lawn was beginning to show signs of neglect. The plants were wilting from lack of watering, and dry leaves were piling up in the flower beds. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She carefully approached the same opening in the fence through which she had entered days before. Her small hands trembled as she pushed aside the branches that blocked the passage. The backyard was completely empty, with no sign of the cars that used to be parked there. It was then that she heard a low moan coming from somewhere below the house. Lily froze, her eyes widening. She knew that voice. It was Oz's, the man she had seen being tortured. But where was he? The sound seemed to come from beneath the earth, as if he were buried alive. Following the sound carefully, she discovered a wooden door half hidden by vines on the side of the house. It was ajar, revealing a stone staircase leading down into the darkness. The moan came from there, from the mansion's basement. Her bare feet descended the icy steps with extreme care. With each step, the smell of mold and dampness grew stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, a faint light filtered through a small window high on the wall, partially illuminating the underground space. Oz Fairbanks was lying on the cold concrete floor, his thin body covered only by a torn t-shirt and dirty pants. His hands and feet were tied with thick ropes, and she could see the red marks left by the burns on his arms. His lips moved constantly, muttering incomprehensible words in a delirious state. "Water, please, someone," he mumbled, his eyes closed and his face burning with fever. Lily approached slowly, her doll clutched against her chest. She had never seen anyone in such a deplorable state. The man who days before wore expensive clothes and lived in a luxurious mansion was now reduced to a broken and abandoned human being. She knew she should run, seek help from some adult, but who would believe a mute girl? Who would listen to her desperate gestures? And what if she tried to leave to get help and Oz passed away while she was gone? A pure and childlike compassion took over her heart. She ran up the stairs and looked for a source of water. She found a garden hose connected to an outdoor faucet. The water that came out was lukewarm and tasted of rust, but it was better than nothing. Her small hands made an improvised cup, carrying small amounts of the liquid down the stairs. It was a slow and tiring process, but she persisted. She knelt beside Oz and began to drip water onto his parched lips. The businessman opened his eyes slowly, his blurred vision trying to focus on the small figure in front of him. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating, a small, dirty, ragged child taking care of him with the dedication of an angel. Who are you?" he whispered, his hoarse voice almost inaudible. Lily just stared at him with her expressive blue eyes, continuing to give him water drop by drop. She couldn't answer, but her gestures spoke for themselves. Care, compassion, an inexplicable kindness coming from someone who clearly had less than he did. "You shouldn't be here," Oz murmured, trying to move, but being prevented by the ropes. "It's dangerous. They might come back." The girl didn't know who they were, but she could imagine. Rick and Brenda, the two who tortured him, had probably abandoned him there to fester in despair until he decided to talk about the hidden money. She went out again and returned with pieces of stale bread that she found in the kitchen trash. They were moldy leftovers, but for someone on the verge of starvation, any food was precious. She softened the pieces in the water and offered them to Oz with infinite patience. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, tears of gratitude streaming down his dirty face. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Lily just smiled for the first time in a long time. She didn't need words to express that sometimes kindness exists without explanation, that compassion can be born in the most unlikely hearts. For hours, she took care of him as best she could. She brought more water, managed to find some old rags to clean his wounds, and even found a dusty blanket in a corner of the basement to cover him. As the sun began to set, Lily settled down in a corner of the basement, determined not to abandon that wounded man. Her doll beside her, she dozed off with one eye open, ready to run if she heard footsteps on the stairs. But a question echoed in her mind. Why did that place, that man, seem strangely familiar to her? A week had passed since Lily had secretly begun to care for Oz in the basement of the mansion. The girl had developed a careful routine. She arrived at dawn through the opening in the fence, brought water and whatever food she could find, and spent the day beside the wounded businessman, watching his slow recovery. Oz was still weak, but the fever had subsided considerably. The ropes that tied his wrists had been cut by Lily using a piece of broken glass she had found in the basement. His wounds were beginning to heal, although the burn marks remained as cruel reminders of his torture. "You saved my life," he murmured every morning when he saw her come down the stairs, carrying her rag doll and some offering found on the streets. "A little kid like you, taking care of an old man like me." Lily just smiled in response, her small hands always busy with some task of care. She cleaned his wounds with clean water, organized the basement space to make it more comfortable, and had even managed to find some old candles to better illuminate the environment during the nights. It was during one of those mornings that something unexpected happened. While searching for medicine on the upper floor of the mansion, Lily ventured into the rooms she had never explored. The house was truly abandoned. Rick and Brenda had fled, taking only what they could carry. In the master bedroom, on top of an old dark wood dresser, she found a framed photograph that made her heart race. The image showed a blonde girl of approximately her age, wearing a light blue dress and holding a doll that was almost identical to hers. The child in the photo smiled radiantly, her blue eyes shining with a joy that Lily could barely remember having felt. Her hands trembled as she held the frame. Something in that image awakened a strange feeling in her chest, a mixture of nostalgia and recognition that she couldn't explain. It was like looking into a mirror of the past, a version of herself that had existed somewhere, lost in time. She took the photograph to the basement where Oz was sitting leaning against the wall, slowly chewing on a piece of bread she had brought. When he saw the image in her hands, his face paled drastically. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice filled with an emotion Lily couldn't identify. The girl pointed upwards, indicating the upper floor of the house. Oz reached out carefully, as if the photograph were made of fragile crystal. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at the image. Was," he began, but he couldn't finish the sentence. He took several deep breaths before continuing. "This girl looks a lot like you, don't you think?" Lily nodded vigorously, pointing to herself and then to the photo. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, even the shape of the face was similar. "Her name was Hope," Oz said finally, his voice almost a whisper. She was very special to me." The girl tilted her head, curious. She wanted to know more about that child in the photograph, about why Oz kept her image with such affection. She picked up her doll and placed it next to the photo, showing how the two dolls were practically identical. Oz watched the comparison, and his face contorted in an expression of deep pain. "Hope had a doll exactly like that," he murmured. "She never parted with it, just like you." Lily felt something stir in the back of her mind, fragments of memories that seemed to want to emerge but always remained out of reach. There was something about that doll, about her past, that she couldn't fully access. During the following days, Oz began to talk more about hope. He told stories of a cheerful girl who loved to play in the garden, who sang invented songs, and who had a smile capable of brightening any room. He spoke of how she had disappeared during a terrible flood that had devastated the region years ago, of how he had never been able to overcome her loss. "She would be your age now," he said one afternoon, watching Lily play silently with her doll. "If she had survived the flood, she would be a 4-year-old girl just like you." The girl stopped playing and stared at him. Something in those words resonated deeply within her soul, as if awakening echoes of a buried past. She began to gesture frantically, pointing to the photo, to herself, to the doll, trying to communicate something urgent that she couldn't express in words. "What is it, sweetie?" Oz asked, approaching her. "What are you trying to tell me?" Lily took her doll and hugged it tight, closing her eyes in concentration. For a moment, fleeting images flashed through her mind: rushing water, distant screams, gentle hands holding her, the sound of a familiar voice singing a lullaby. When she opened her eyes, tears streamed down her cheeks. Something important was trying to emerge from her memory. Something about that house, about Oz, about who she really was. "You remember something, don't you?" he asked softly, reaching out to touch her face with paternal affection. "There's something familiar about this place." Lily nodded slowly, still confused, but certain that her presence there was not just a coincidence. There was a connection between her and that mansion, between her and Oz, that went far beyond the chance that had brought her there. That night, for the first time since arriving in the basement, Lily was able to sleep soundly. And in her dreams, a distant voice sang a melody that her heart knew, even if her mind couldn't remember where from. The days turned into weeks, and Oz was recovering quickly under Lily's dedicated care. He could walk around the basement without difficulty, and his wounds were almost completely healed. The girl had become his silent salvation, appearing every morning like a guardian angel who didn't speak, but whose presence said everything. During her explorations of the abandoned mansion, Lily had made a discovery that intrigued her deeply. In the closet of the master bedroom, hidden behind dusty men's clothes, there was a wooden chest locked with an antique padlock. The piece of furniture caught her attention inexplicably, as if it held secrets that her soul recognized. On that Thursday morning, she decided to tell Oz about her discovery. She went down to the basement carrying her doll and gestured excitedly, pointing upwards and making movements with her hands to indicate something rectangular and locked. "You found something upstairs?" he asked, watching her gestures carefully. "Something kept in a box?" Lily nodded vigorously, then made a key movement indicating that it was locked. Oz was silent for a long moment, his face showing an intense internal struggle. "I haven't opened that chest in a long time," he murmured finally. "Since the flood." The girl tilted her head, curious. She took Oz's hand and began to pull him gently towards the stairs, indicating that she wanted him to come with her. He hesitated initially, but the determination in her blue eyes convinced him. Together, they went up to the master bedroom. Oz limped slightly, still recovering from his injuries, but he managed to keep up with Lily's lively pace. When they reached the closet, she pointed directly at the hidden chest. "How did you know it was there?" he asked, astonished. "It's completely hidden behind the clothes." Lily just shrugged, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly where to look. Oz pushed the clothes aside and pulled the heavy chest out of the closet. His hands trembled as he took a small key from his shirt pocket. "I haven't opened this in 4 years," he said, his voice choked with emotion, since I accepted that she would never come back. When the lid opened, Lily let out a small, silent sigh. Inside the chest were children's clothes carefully folded, small dresses, tiny shoes, delicate wool coats. All the pieces were exactly her size, as if they had been kept especially for her. But what caught her attention most was a small, light blue blanket embroidered with yellow flowers. The moment her eyes landed on it, her mind was flooded with a wave of familiar sensations. The smell, the texture, the color, everything awakened something deep in her memory. Without hesitation, she reached out towards the blanket. Oz watched in silence as she took it and pressed it against her face, breathing deeply. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but she didn't know why. Hope loved this blanket, Oz said softly. She slept with it every night since she was a baby. She said it smelled like safety. Lily turned to him, still holding the blanket, her big eyes filled with a silent question that she couldn't formulate. There was something about that object that touched the deepest part of her soul, awakening memories that seemed to be buried under layers of trauma and forgetfulness. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Oz and Lily froze, their eyes meeting in panic. Someone had entered the mansion, and by the heavy, determined steps, it wasn't a friendly visit. "Oz, I know you're there," a familiar female voice shouted. It was Brenda, the woman who had participated in his torture. "Rick may have run like a coward, but I've come back to finish what we started." Oz held Lily's hand tightly, signaling absolute silence. They needed to hide, but where? The basement was the most obvious place to search. His eyes scanned the room desperately until they settled on a large wardrobe in the corner. Quickly, he pushed Lily into the wardrobe along with the blanket and her doll, whispering, "Stay here, no matter what happens. Don't make any noise." Brenda's footsteps were approaching the hallway. Oz closed the lid of the chest hastily and tried to rearrange the scene, but it was too late. "There you are!" Brenda exclaimed as she entered the room, her eyes red with anger and alcohol. "I thought you had managed to escape, but I knew you'd come back home." "Brenda, for God's sake," Oz pleaded, trying to remain calm. "I've suffered enough. What more do you want from me?" "I want what I've always wanted, the money you're hiding," she shouted, approaching him threateningly. "Rick may have given up, but I know you have a fortune stashed somewhere in this house." From the wardrobe, Lily watched through a crack between the doors. Her heart was beating so hard she was afraid Brenda could hear it. She held the blanket against her chest as if it were a protective talisman. "I've told you 1,000 times, I don't have any money hidden here," Oz protested. "Everything I own is in the banks, in legal investments." "Liar," Brenda roared, pushing him hard. "I saw you talking to those dangerous men last week. They came to collect a debt, and you promised to pay in cash." Oz paled. It was true. He owed a considerable amount to people who didn't accept excuses or delays. He had promised to pay in 2 weeks, but with the kidnapping and torture, the deadline was running out quickly. "They gave me 1 more week," he murmured. "I can get the money through the banks. I just need time." "Time you don't have," Brenda yelled. "They came back yesterday looking for you. When they find out you're alive, they'll want the payment immediately." It was at that moment that Lily noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the crack in the wardrobe door, she saw Brenda take something out of her pocket, a small knife, but sharp enough to cause serious damage. The girl knew she had to do something to help Oz, but what? She was just a small, mute child, without physical strength or the ability to call for help. But perhaps, just perhaps, her silent presence could make a difference once again. The tension in the room was palpable. Brenda wielded the knife with trembling hands, her bloodshot eyes revealing that she had been drinking before coming to the mansion. Oz backed away, slowly, trying to keep his distance from the blade that gleamed under the afternoon light coming through the window. "You ruined my life!" Brenda shouted, her voice laden with years of resentment. "I worked in this house for 15 years, took care of you, and how do you reward me? By firing me when I needed the job most." "Brenda, you know why I had to do that." Oz replied carefully, trying not to provoke more anger. You were drinking on the job, stealing food from the pantry, coming in late every day. Lies, she roared, taking a step forward. You fired me because you found out about us. Because you couldn't stand to see my face anymore and be reminded of what happened between us. From the wardrobe, Lily watched with increasing horror. The conversation had taken a turn that she didn't fully understand, but she could feel the pain in both voices. There was a history between those two adults, something that went far beyond a simple employer-employee relationship. What happened between us was a mistake, Oz said quietly. I was vulnerable after the flood, alone, desperate, but that doesn't justify everything you did afterwards. Brenda laughed bitterly. A mistake? You made me promises, Oz. You said you'd take care of me, that you'd give me a better life, and then when you got tired, you threw me away like trash. I never promised anything I couldn't deliver, he replied, but there was guilt in his voice. And you know that our involvement only happened because I was destroyed by the loss of hope. Upon hearing the name of the girl in the photograph, Lily felt her heart race. She gripped the blue blanket tighter, as if it could protect her from the violence unfolding outside the wardrobe. Hope, always hope, Brenda roared. Even after leaving this world, that girl continued to be more important to you than anyone alive. You used me to forget your pain, and when you didn't need me anymore, you discarded me. That's not true, Oz protested, but his voice sounded weak. I tried to be fair to you. Fair? Brenda held the knife more firmly now. Fair would have been to give me what you promised. Fair would have been to treat me like the woman who was by your side when you needed it most. Lily began to understand fragments of the situation. Brenda had been more than an employee to Oz. She had been his companion during a difficult period in his life. But something had gone wrong between them, creating the resentment that now threatened to explode into violence. Where's the money, Oz? Brenda returned to the original subject, pointing the knife in his direction. I know you're hiding a fortune here. Rick may have believed your lies, but I know you better than anyone. I've already told you I don't have any money hidden in the house, he insisted. Everything is in the banks. You can check. Then how are you going to pay those dangerous men? She asked sarcastically. They don't accept checks or bank transfers. They want cash, and you promised you'd have it. Oz lowered his head, defeated. It was true. He had gotten involved with the wrong people trying to save some failed investments. Now he owed an amount that he couldn't quickly raise through legal means. I'll find a way, he murmured. Maybe by selling some properties quickly, taking out loans. You have 3 days. Brenda cut him off. 3 days, or they'll collect in another way. And when that happens, I'll make sure they know exactly where to find you. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Lily, still hidden in the wardrobe, began to feel strange. The blue blanket in her hands seemed to be getting warmer, and again fragments of memories began to emerge in her mind. She saw herself running through familiar hallways, playing in gardens she knew, being lulled to sleep in that same blanket. But there was something else. A female voice screaming, water rising rapidly, desperate hands trying to save her from a devastating current. Without realizing it, Lily began to sway back and forth, an unconscious movement she made when she was trying to process intense emotions. The movement caused one of the boards in the back of the wardrobe to creak slightly. Brenda stopped speaking abruptly. What was that? She asked, looking around the room suspiciously. I didn't hear anything, Oz lied quickly, but his eyes turned involuntarily to the wardrobe where Lily was hidden. There's someone here, Brenda exclaimed, walking towards the wardrobe. You brought someone to help you. There's no one here but us, Oz insisted, but the panic in his voice was evident. Brenda approached the wardrobe, the knife still in her hand. Lily could hear her footsteps approaching and held her breath, trying to stay completely still. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure Brenda could hear it. Come out, Brenda ordered, putting her hand on the wardrobe handle. I know there's someone hiding in there. Oz stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Brenda, stop it! You're paranoid!" But it was too late. Brenda pulled the wardrobe door open with force, and her eyes widened when she saw the small figure of Lily crouching in the back, clutching the blue blanket, with tears streaming down her frightened face. "What the hell?" Brenda murmured, momentarily confused. "Who is this child?" Oz's response made all of their worlds tremble. I don't know for sure, but I think she may be the answer to a lot of questions I've never been able to ask." The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda stared at Lily, who remained curled up in the back of the wardrobe, clutching the blue blanket as if her life depended on it. Oz positioned himself protectively between the two, his paternal instincts awakening in the face of the child's vulnerability. "Get her out of there," Brenda ordered, still wielding the knife, but her voice had lost some of its initial aggressiveness. The presence of a small child had completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Oz reached out gently to Lily. "Come on, sweetie. It's okay." His voice was calm, comforting, as if he were speaking to a wounded animal. Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting from Oz to Brenda and back again. The blanket was still clutched tightly against her chest, and something about it continued to awaken fragmented memories that she couldn't fully piece together. Slowly, she emerged from the wardrobe, staying close to Oz. Brenda watched her with a confused expression, the knife still in her hand, but pointed downwards. "Where did she come from?" Brenda asked, her voice less hostile now. "And why is she using Hope's blanket?" "She found me a few weeks ago," Oz explained carefully. "She was taking care of me in the basement after you and Rick left me there." "A street kid found you?" Brenda frowned. "And you just accepted it?" "She saved my life," Oz replied, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "She brought water, food, tended to my wounds. Without her, I would have passed." Brenda looked at the girl more closely. There was something familiar in those blue eyes, in that tousled blonde hair, in the way she held the rag doll, a resemblance that made her stomach churn with impossible possibilities. "What's her name?" Brenda asked, her voice almost a whisper. "She doesn't speak," Oz explained. "She seems to be mute, or at least too traumatized to speak." "I don't know her name, where she came from, anything about her family." Lily looked between the two adults, feeling the tension in the air ease slightly, but still ready to run if necessary. The blue blanket in her hands continued to awaken strange sensations, warmth, security, a distant melody that she could almost remember. "Let me see that doll," Brenda said suddenly, extending her free hand. Lily recoiled instinctively, hugging the doll tighter. It was her only possession, her only constant companion during years of solitude on the streets. "She's not going to hurt it," Oz said softly to Lily. "She just wants to look." After a long hesitation, Lily held out the doll, but without letting go completely. Brenda examined the rag toy with growing attention, her eyes widening when she noticed specific details. "It can't be," she murmured, almost dropping the knife. "This doll. I made it myself for Hope on her 3rd birthday." Oz felt his heart race. "What?" "Look here." Brenda pointed to a small mark on the base of the doll. "This heart-shaped patch I made when Hope tore the doll's arm playing in the garden. And this blue ink stain on the dress, it was when she tried to paint the doll to make it prettier." The silence that followed was charged with disturbing implications. Oz looked at Lily with an expression of growing astonishment as fragments of an impossible possibility began to form in his mind. "Hope took this doll everywhere," Brenda continued, her voice trembling. "She had it with her on the night of the flood. When they found her body, the doll wasn't there." "But that's impossible," Oz said, although his voice betrayed less certainty than his words. "Hope, she passed in the flood. I saw the body. I attended the funeral." "You saw an unrecognizable body after 3 days in the water," Brenda corrected brutally. "A small, blonde child's body, approximately Hope's size. But are you really sure it was her?" Lily watched the conversation without fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that it was about her, about something important that everyone seemed to know except herself. The blanket in her hands seemed to pulse with memories that were struggling to emerge. "The clothes," Oz murmured. "She was wearing the blue dress I had bought." "The same dress that half a dozen other children in the area were wearing," Brenda said. "You bought 5 identical dresses at that store and gave them to several needy families, remember?" Oz sat down heavily on the bed, the weight of the possibilities crushing his certainties. For 4 years he had mourned a sister who may never have left this world. For 4 years he had blamed himself for not protecting someone who may have survived and been wandering the streets, needing him. "If she really is Hope," he said finally, "why doesn't she recognize me? Why doesn't she talk?" "Trauma," Brenda replied, her own voice choked now. A 4-year-old child going through a devastating flood, losing her family, living on the streets. "It's enough to cause amnesia and selective mutism." Lily approached Oz, sensing his anguish even without fully understanding its source. She placed her small, free hand on his knee, offering the same silent comfort she had given him during his weeks of recovery. "Hope always did that," Oz whispered, looking at the small hand on his knee. "When I was sad or worried, she would come and put her little hand like that, without saying anything, just being present." Brenda put the knife in her pocket and knelt in front of Lily. "Sweetie," she said gently, "do you remember anything about this place? About this house?" Lily tilted her head, her big eyes studying Brenda's face. There was something familiar about that woman too. Something that awakened memories of care and protection mixed with other, more confusing sensations. Slowly, Lily let go of one of the hands of the blanket and pointed to the window of the room. Then she gestured something that seemed to be running water, her small hands making undulating movements. "Water," Oz interpreted. "You remember water?" Lily nodded vigorously, then pointed to herself and made gestures of fear, of running, of something terrible happening. Tears began to stream down her cheeks as fragments of traumatic memories tried to emerge. "The flood," Brenda murmured. "She remembers the flood." It was then that Lily did something that none of the adults expected. For the first time in years, she opened her mouth and made a sound, weak, hoarse, almost inaudible, but definitely an attempt to speak. "Oh, Oswald," she managed to whisper, the words coming with difficulty from a long, silent throat. The impact of those words was like a lightning bolt. Oz fell to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face as an absolute certainty took hold of his heart. "Hope," he whispered. "My little Hope, you've come home." The revelation hit all 3 of them like a devastating wave. Oz remained kneeling before Lily, or Hope, as he now knew she really was, with tears streaming freely down his face. 4 years of mourning, guilt, and despair began to unravel before the impossible reality that was presented. Brenda watched the scene with a mixture of relief and horror. During all those years, she had carried the weight of knowing that perhaps she could have done more to find hope on the night of the flood. Now, the girl she thought was lost forever was there, alive, but transformed by trauma into a silent, haunted child. "How did you manage to survive?" Oz asked softly, reaching out to touch Hope's face. "How did you get to the streets?" The girl looked at him with her big blue eyes and slowly began to make gestures with her hands. She pointed to the window, made movements of water, then imitated someone carrying her, followed by gestures of confusion and fear. "Someone saved her from the flood," Brenda interpreted. "But then she lost her memory?" Hope nodded sadly, hugging her doll tighter. She began to gesture again, this time showing different people taking care of her for short periods, then rejecting or abandoning her. Her small hands told a painful story of rejection and abandonment. "The families that tried to take care of you," Oz whispered, understanding. They gave up because you didn't speak, because they didn't know how to deal with your trauma. Confirmation came through a sad nod of her head. Hope had passed from family to family, always being seen as a burden too difficult to carry, until she finally ended up on the streets, surviving on her own as best she could. That's why you didn't recognize me when you got here, Oz continued, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place painfully. The trauma blocked your memories of me, of this house, of our life together. Brenda approached slowly, her expression transformed by deep guilt. Hope, she said softly. I'm so sorry. During all these years, I should have looked harder. I should have insisted that you could be alive somewhere. The girl looked at Brenda curiously, and something in her eyes suggested a vague recognition. Slowly, she extended a small hand towards the woman's face, touching it gently, as if she were trying to remember. Do you remember Aunt Brenda? Oz asked hopefully. Hope hesitated, then made a gesture that indicated a little, or maybe. There were fragments of memory there, but still very confused and mixed with years of trauma. It was at that moment that a noise coming from outside made them freeze. Cars driving up the steep road leading to the mansion, powerful engines that clearly didn't belong to vehicles from the area. They've come, Brenda whispered, paling. The men who are collecting the debt. They're here earlier than expected. Oz felt the panic take over his chest. He didn't have the money he owed, and now he had discovered that his sister was alive. He couldn't lose her again, not after having found her by a miracle. Hope, he said urgently, you need to hide. Go to the basement and stay there until I come to get you, no matter how long it takes. But the girl shook her head vigorously, clinging to Oz's arm. She had just reunited with her brother. She had just begun to recover her memories. She didn't want to be separated from him again. She's not going, Brenda said, observing the determination in the child's eyes. And maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's time to face this once and for all. The cars stopped in front of the mansion, and heavy footsteps echoed in the front garden. Male voices discussed something in low but threatening tones. Oswald Fairbanks, a rough voice shouted from outside. We know you're in there. Come talk to us like a man. Oz looked out the window and saw 3 burly men wearing dark suits, clearly not people to be trifled with. Their faces were hard, marked by scars, and they all had the posture of someone who was used to getting what they wanted through intimidation. How much do you owe them? Brenda asked softly. $50,000, Oz replied, his voice almost inaudible. Money I invested badly trying to save the company after I thought I had lost hope. I was desperate. I did business with the wrong people. Hope watched the conversation without fully understanding, but feeling the tension and fear that permeated the environment. Her small hands moved instinctively, making gestures that indicated protection, hiding, running away. We're not running this time, Oz said, a new determination born in his voice. I found my sister after 4 years of thinking I had lost her. I'm not going to let anything separate us again. But you don't have the money, Brenda reminded him. Then I'll find a solution, he replied firmly. I'll sell everything if necessary. I'll mortgage the company, but I will protect Hope. The footsteps outside approached the front door. A loud knock echoed through the house, followed by a threatening voice. Open this door, Fairbanks. We don't have all day. Hope did something unexpected. She carefully placed her doll on the floor and walked to one of the drawers of the antique dresser. She opened it easily, as if she knew exactly where it was, and took out a small golden key. Oz and Brenda watched her in astonishment as she went to a specific section of the wall where there was a decorative wooden panel. She inserted the key into an almost invisible lock, and the wall opened, revealing a secret compartment. How did you... Oz began, but stopped when he saw what was inside the hiding place. Bundles of money carefully organized, important documents and some valuable jewels. It was exactly what they needed to solve the immediate problem. I always knew where Dad hid the important things, Hope said, her voice still weak and hoarse, but clear enough to be understood. I just didn't remember. Until now. The revelation that she had recovered, not only her voice, but also her memories about the secrets of the house, brought a new wave of emotion. But the impatient footsteps outside reminded everyone that the immediate danger still needed to be faced. "Let's solve this," Oz said, taking the necessary money, "and then we'll start our life again, the way it always should have been." But as he headed for the door, a final surprise awaited them. Brenda held his arm and said something that would change everything once again. "Oz, there's something you need to know about the night of the flood, something I've never had the courage to tell you." Brenda's words froze Oz halfway to the door. The impatient fists of the men outside echoed through the house, but suddenly seemed distant compared to the weight of the revelation he was about to hear. "What do you mean?" he asked, turning slowly to face Brenda. Hope remained beside the secret compartment, watching the two adults with an expression that mixed curiosity and apprehension. Brenda took a deep breath, the words struggling to leave her throat. "On the night of the flood, I was here at the mansion. You had left for a business meeting in Charleston and wouldn't be back until the next day." "I know that," Oz said impatiently, the noise outside intensifying. "You were taking care of Hope. That's why I blamed myself so much when I found out when I thought she had been lost." "But you don't know everything," Brenda continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "When the rain started to get heavy, I was drinking. I had found out that you were planning to fire me. I had found the letter that you had written, but hadn't delivered yet." Oz paled. He had really planned to fire Brenda that week, but for professional reasons, she was increasingly negligent with her responsibilities and arriving at work under the influence of alcohol. "I was furious," Brenda confessed. "I drank more than I should have, and when the water started rising quickly, I didn't react in time." "Brenda, for God's sake, what happened?" Oz asked, his voice filled with despair. Lily moved closer to the two, sensing the emotional tension in the air. Her small hands moved instinctively, making gestures that seemed to indicate confused memories emerging. Water, fear, someone screaming. "The water rose so fast that when I realized the real danger, the current was already carrying everything away," Brenda continued, her voice breaking. "I tried to grab Hope, but she was playing in the back garden, and I tripped, hit my head, and passed out for a few minutes." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the threatening sounds coming from the front door. "When I woke up, the water was even higher, and Hope had disappeared," Brenda went on. "I searched desperately, shouted her name, but the current was too strong. I thought she had been swept away by the flood." "And why did you never tell me this?" Oz asked, his voice filled with pain and suppressed anger. "Because I was afraid," Brenda admitted. "Afraid that you would blame me forever, afraid of losing you too. So when they found the child's body 3 days later, I let you believe it was Hope. It was easier to mourn her passing together than to confess my negligence." Hope began to gesture more frantically, pointing to herself, then to the window, making movements that clearly represented someone carrying her. Her memories were returning in waves, bringing fragments of the terrible night that changed her life. "Someone saved me," she said in her weak voice, the words coming with difficulty. "A man, carried, away from the water." Oz knelt in front of his sister. "Who, Hope? Do you remember who saved you?" The girl closed her eyes, concentrating intently. "Man, big, beard, spoke gently to me. And then," Oz encouraged, he took me to a house. But then he got scared. Said he couldn't keep me, left me with a family, but they didn't want me." The painful story unfolded, revealing years of abandonment and rejection that little Hope had faced. Each family that had tried to take care of her had given up when they realized that she didn't speak, that she didn't respond normally to social interactions. "Fairbanks!" a rough voice shouted from outside, interrupting the moment. "Last chance! Open this door, or we're breaking it down. Oz looked at the money in his hands, then at Hope and finally at Brenda. A crucial decision needed to be made, and time was running out. I'm going to resolve this now, he said, heading for the door. And then we'll talk about everything that happened, about how to move forward. Oz, wait, Brenda called out. There's one more thing you need to know. He stopped again, exasperated. What now? The man who saved Hope from the flood, she said hesitantly. I know who it was, and you know him too. Before Oz could respond, the sound of wood breaking echoed through the house. The men had lost patience and broken down the front door. Where's our money, Fairbanks? A gravelly voice roared as heavy footsteps echoed through the main hallway. Hope ran instinctively behind Oz, who quickly closed the secret compartment in the wall, keeping only the money needed to pay off the debt. It's here! Oz shouted in response. I have your money! 3 men entered the room, their hard faces scanning the room distrustfully. The leader, a bald man with scars on his neck, looked directly at Oz. 50,000, as agreed, the man said. And the late fees, another 10,000. The interest wasn't in the original agreement, Oz protested. It is now, the man replied coldly. You delayed the payment, caused problems for our organization. 60,000, or we start collecting in other ways. Oz looked at the money in his hands. He had exactly 50,000, enough to pay off the original debt, but not to cover the extra interest that was being imposed. I don't have 60,000, he said honestly. Then we have a problem, the leader said, his eyes fixing on Hope, who was hiding behind Oz. Maybe we can make a different arrangement. Oz's blood ran cold as he realized the implicit threat. There was no way in the world he would allow anything to happen to Hope, not after having found her again. It was then that Brenda did something completely unexpected. She stepped forward and said, I have the 10,000 that's missing. But in exchange, I want you to listen to a proposal that could benefit all of us. The leader laughed with disdain. A woman trying to negotiate with us? This should be interesting. You don't know who Oswald Fairbanks really is, do you? Brenda said with surprising confidence. You don't know what he's really worth, or the contacts he has in the state government. Oz looked at her in astonishment, not understanding where she was going with this. But Brenda continued, Oz isn't just a local businessman. He has information about million-dollar mining contracts that you could use to significantly expand your business. It was a bold lie, but said with such conviction that the men stopped to consider it. The leader studied Oz with renewed interest. Keep talking, he said finally. Brenda had created an opportunity, but now Oz needed to decide whether to go along with the lie to protect Hope, or whether there was another way to resolve the situation without getting even more deeply involved with dangerous people. Oz felt the weight of the moment on his shoulders. Brenda's lie had created a dangerous opportunity, but perhaps it was his only chance to protect Hope and resolve the situation without violence. His eyes met those of his sister, who was watching him with an absolute confidence that he didn't want to disappoint. It's true, he said finally, deciding to follow Brenda's strategy. I have access to information about mining bids that haven't been opened to the public yet. Contracts worth millions. The leader of the men, who introduced himself as Sergio, crossed his arms and studied Oz with growing interest. And why would you share this information with us? Because I need partners with specific resources, Oz replied carefully. To get some contracts, you need to have influence in certain sectors that I can't reach alone. It was a dangerous dance of half-truths. Oz really knew the mining sector and had contacts in the government, but not in the way he was insinuating. Hope remained silent behind him, her big eyes watching every movement of the strange men. Show us something concrete, Sergio demanded. We don't do business based on vague promises. Oz thought quickly. He needed something convincing, but that wouldn't compromise him criminally. There's a bid for quartzite exploration in the Blue Ridge Mountains that will be opened in 2 months. The notice hasn't been published yet, but I can get an advance copy. Brenda watched him nervously, hoping he knew what he was doing. Hope in turn began to gesture discreetly, pointing to the hallway as if she wanted to leave. "Interesting," Sergio murmured. "And what would be our part in this business?" "You come in as minority partners in my company," Oz improvised. "I provide the technical knowledge and contacts, you provide the initial capital needed for the proposals, profits divided proportionally." It was a risky proposal, but one that could work if he managed to maintain control of the situation. The 3 men looked at each other, clearly considering the offer. "And our current debt?" Sergio asked. "It's forgiven as an initial investment in the business," Oz replied. "Consider the 50,000 as an entry fee for a much more lucrative partnership." It was at that moment that Hope did something unexpected. She carefully placed her doll on the floor and walked to the window, pointing to the yard urgently. Her gestures indicated that there was something important outside. "What does the girl want?" asked one of Sergio's men. Oz looked out the window and saw what had caught Hope's attention. A familiar car was driving up the road. It was the vehicle of Dr. Henry Miller, the local doctor who had been a close friend of his family for decades. "It's Dr. Miller," Brenda murmured, recognizing him too. "He must have seen the strange cars and came to check if everything is okay." Sergio frowned. "We don't want witnesses to our conversation. He's discreet," Oz assured quickly, "and in fact he could be useful for our business. Dr. Miller knows many influential people in the region." The car stopped in the front yard, and they could see Dr. Miller, a 65-year-old man with grey hair and a dignified posture, getting out of the vehicle. His simple but well-kept clothes and his medical bag clearly identified him as a respected professional in the community. "Oswald," the doctor shouted from the front door, "is everything all right there? I heard that there was trouble." Hope reacted to the sound of the doctor's voice in an unexpected way. Her eyes widened, and she began to gesture frantically, pointing to the window and making movements that clearly indicated recognition. "You know the doctor?" Oz asked, surprised. Hope nodded vigorously, then made gestures that represented water, saving, care. The pieces of another puzzle began to fall into place in Oz's mind. "Brenda," he said slowly, "when you said you knew who saved Hope from the flood." "It was Dr. Miller," she confirmed in a low voice. "He told me years later, when it was too late to change anything. He said he found Hope on the bank of the river, far from the city, and that he tried to look for her family for weeks." "And why did you never tell me?" Oz asked, feeling a mixture of gratitude and frustration. "Because Dr. Miller made me promise not to tell," Brenda revealed. "He felt guilty for not being able to find you, for having left Hope with a family that ended up abandoning her." Sergio was getting impatient with the conversation. "This is very touching, but we have business to resolve. Get this doctor to leave, or we'll have to deal with him in another way." The implicit threat made Oz make a decision. "Dr. Miller," he shouted through the window, "come up here, please. I need your help with something important." "Oswald, what are you doing?" Brenda whispered, alarmed. "Trusting someone who already saved my sister once," he replied. "Maybe he can help us again." Dr. Miller climbed the stairs with his measured step and entered the room. His eyes quickly scanned the scene, the 3 intimidating-looking men, Brenda visibly nervous, Oz in a protective position, and the small figure of Hope. When his eyes landed on the girl, Dr. Miller was visibly shocked. "My God," he whispered, "it can't be." "Dr. Miller," Oz said carefully, "I present my sister Hope, whom you saved 4 years ago from the flood." The doctor approached Hope slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "Sweetie," he said in a choked voice, "I looked for your family for months. I never forgave myself for not being able to find them." Hope approached the doctor and touched his hand gently, making a gesture that clearly meant, "Thank you." Dr. Miller knelt in front of her, his emotion evident. "Where have you been all these years?" he asked. "How did you get here?" Sergio interrupted the emotional reunion. "This is all very nice, but we have business to finish. Doctor, you need to leave now." Dr. Miller stood up and faced Sergio with the dignity of someone who had dedicated his life to helping others. "Young man, I don't know who you are, but this is the home of a family I've respected for decades. If there's a problem here, maybe I can help resolve it. The doctor has many influential contacts," Oz said quickly, seeing an opportunity. "If we're going to go into business together, he could be a valuable partner." It was another risky move, but Dr. Miller was respected throughout the region. His presence could give legitimacy to whatever Oz managed to negotiate. "What kind of business?" Dr. Miller asked, clearly confused but willing to help. Sergio studied the doctor carefully. There was something in Dr. Miller's respectable demeanor that made him reconsider the situation. "Maybe we can talk about it," he said finally. But it was then that another sound alerted them. Sirens in the distance, approaching the mansion quickly. Someone had called the police, and now everyone would have to deal with much bigger complications than a simple money debt. The sound of the approaching sirens created immediate tension in the room. Sergio and his men exchanged worried glances, clearly not expecting this complication. Oz felt his heart race. The situation was spinning completely out of his control. "Who called the police?" Sergio asked in a dangerously low voice, his eyes sweeping over each person in the room. "It wasn't us," Oz said quickly. "Maybe some neighbor heard the noise when you broke down the door." Dr. Miller positioned himself discreetly closer to Hope, his protective instincts activated. The girl, in turn, seemed less scared by the sirens than by the presence of the strange men, as if she somehow knew that the police represented safety. "We have to get out of here," said one of Sergio's men. "We can't be found here with this half-baked business story." Brenda stepped forward, her expression determined. "I called them," she confessed, surprising everyone. "When you broke down the door, I discreetly called Sheriff Brody. He's my cousin." Sergio turned to her in fury. "You... Wait," Dr. Miller interrupted authoritatively. "Before anyone does something they might regret, perhaps we should all take a deep breath and resolve this in a civilized manner." The sirens were getting closer and closer. Oz could see through the window that there were at least 2 patrol cars driving up the steep road. He had a few minutes before the situation became definitively complicated. "Sergio," he said quickly, "you can walk away now and lose the $50,000 you brought, or you can trust me and walk out of here as my legitimate business partner. Dr. Miller can confirm my reputation in the area." Dr. Miller looked at Oswald in surprise, but quickly understood he was being asked to help somehow. "Oswald Fairbanks is one of the most respected businessmen in Harmony Creek," he said to Sergio. "If he's proposing a partnership, it must be something serious." Hope watched the conversation intently, and suddenly began gesturing urgently. She pointed to the secret compartment in the wall, then to Sergio, making movements that clearly indicated give or hand over. "What is she trying to say?" asked Dr. Miller. Oswald understood immediately. "Hope is suggesting I give you a token of good faith, something concrete to show I'm serious about our business." He went to the secret compartment and retrieved some documents that had been stored there along with the money. They were old mining contracts and correspondence with government agencies, nothing illegal but official enough to seem important. "These are some of my contacts in the industry," he said, extending the papers to Sergio. "Take this as collateral that I will honor our partnership." Sergio quickly examined the documents. He didn't have enough knowledge to assess their veracity, but they seemed official enough to be convincing. Police cars pulled up in the front yard, and authoritative voices echoed from outside. "Police! Someone reported a disturbance on this property." "All right," Sergio said quickly, pocketing the documents. "We'll trust you, Fairbanks. But if this is a setup, you'll regret it. How are you going to get out of here?" asked Brenda, looking nervously at the window. Dr. Miller spoke up. There's an exit through the back of the property that leads to a side road. My car is blocking the police's view in that direction." It was a risky but viable solution. Sergio nodded to his men, who quickly headed to the back of the house. Before leaving, Sergio turned to Oswald. "1 week," he said. "In 1 week we meet to discuss the details of these contracts. And Fairbanks, I hope you understand, we don't like being deceived." After the 3 men disappeared through the back, Oswald felt his legs weaken. The tension of the last few minutes had been almost unbearable, and now he needed to deal with the police in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. "Oswald," said Dr. Miller calmly, "what is really going on here? And how does this child—" "It's a long story, Doctor," replied Oswald, picking Hope up. "But the short version is, I found my sister after 4 years of believing she was gone in the flood." Dr. Miller shook his head, clearly moved. "I searched for you for months after I found her. I never imagined she was your sister." Firm steps ascended the front stairs, and soon 3 police officers appeared in the doorway of the room. Sheriff Brody, a burly man of 45 with a thick mustache, looked around, assessing the situation. "Brenda," he said, recognizing his cousin. "You called about a break-in?" "There was a misunderstanding, cousin," replied Brenda quickly. "Some debt collectors came here about a debt of Oswald's, but everything has been resolved peacefully." "Where are these debt collectors now?" asked Brody, suspicious. "They've already left," said Oswald. "I settled the debt, and there are no more problems." The sheriff observed the broken front door. "They did this?" "It was an overreaction on their part," admitted Oswald. "But as I said, everything is settled." Dr. Miller approached the sheriff. "Brody, I can confirm that when I arrived here, the situation was being resolved amicably. Oswald is dealing with some business issues, but nothing that warrants further concern." The doctor's respectable presence seemed to reassure the sheriff. Brody had known Dr. Miller for decades and trusted his judgment. "And this girl?" asked Brody, noticing Hope in Oswald's arms. "She's my sister," said Oswald simply. "Just came back home after a long time." Brody studied Hope's face carefully. "She looks familiar. Where has she been all these years?" It was a complicated question that could lead to investigations Oswald preferred to avoid. Hope's story of living on the streets, being rejected by families, could raise questions about neglect that would further complicate his situation. "She was living with distant relatives in another state," lied Oswald, "but now she's back to stay with me permanently." Dr. Miller observed the lie without comment, but his eyes showed understanding. He knew that Hope's true story was much more complicated and painful. "Well," said Brody finally, "if there are no more problems here, we'll head back to the station. But Oswald, if these debt collectors come back causing trouble, call us immediately." After the police left, a heavy silence filled the room. Oswald, Brenda, Dr. Miller, and Hope were left alone with the weight of everything that had happened. "Now what do we do?" asked Brenda. "Are you really going to try and do business with those men?" "I have no choice," replied Oswald. "I gave my word, and people like Sergio don't forget broken promises." Dr. Miller approached Hope, who was still in Oswald's arms. "Little one," he said gently, "do you remember me?" Hope nodded and extended a small hand to touch the doctor's face. Then she gestured in a way that clearly meant thank you and safe. "She remembers that you saved her," Oswald interpreted. "And now," said Dr. Miller with determination, "we're going to make sure she stays safe. Oswald, you have a week to find a solution to this problem with Sergio. I'll help in any way I can." But what none of them knew was that the solution would come from a completely unexpected source and would change their lives in a way they never imagined. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Sergio and his men. The mansion had regained an appearance of normalcy, with the front door repaired and the family routine slowly settling in. Hope was adapting to life with Oswald, her memories gradually returning like gentle waves that brought fragments of her lost childhood. Dr. Miller had become a constant presence in the house, visiting daily to monitor Hope's emotional recovery and help Oswald plan a strategy for dealing with Sergio. The girl had developed a special affection for the doctor, seeing him as a comforting father figure. On that Tuesday morning, while Hope was playing in the garden with her rag doll, now cleaned and mended by Brenda, Dr. Miller made a discovery that would change everything again. "Oswald," he called from the office, where he was examining some old documents. "You need to see this immediately." Oswald left Hope in Brenda's care and went to the office. Dr. Miller was holding a birth certificate yellowed with age, his face showing an expression of shock. "Where did you find this?" asked Oswald. "It was among the papers in the secret compartment," replied the doctor. "Have you seen this document before?" Oswald examined the certificate carefully. It was Hope's birth certificate, but there was something strange. The parents' names were filled out differently than he remembered. "This isn't right," he murmured. "Our mother's name is wrong here." Dr. Miller took a deep breath. "Oswald, I need to tell you something I discovered a few years ago, but I never had the courage to share. About your family, about Hope." "What do you mean?" "When I was treating your mother before she passed away, she revealed something to me in her last days," said Dr. Miller carefully. "Something about Hope that would change your perspective on everything." Oswald sat down heavily in the chair. "Doctor, for God's sake, just tell me what it is. Hope is not your biological sister," revealed Dr. Miller softly. "Your mother adopted her when she was a baby, but never told you." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Oswald looked out the window, where he could see Hope laughing as she played, her innocent joy contrasting with the revelation he had just received. "What do you mean, adopted?" he asked finally. "Hope was the daughter of a young woman who worked in your father's mine," explained Dr. Miller. "Her biological mother passed away during childbirth, and the father abandoned the child. And my mother decided to raise her as her daughter. Your mother always wanted to have more children after you, but she couldn't get pregnant again. When she learned about Hope, she saw it as a blessing. She decided to adopt her officially, but kept it a secret to protect the girl." Oswald processed the information slowly. "So Hope never knew she was adopted?" "No. And your mother made me promise that I would only tell you if it was absolutely necessary for the girl's well-being." "And why are you telling me now?" Dr. Miller pointed to another document he had found. "Because I also found Hope's original birth certificate, and on it is the name of the biological father." Oswald took the document with trembling hands. When he read the name, he felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. "It can't be," he whispered. "Rick Martin," read Dr. Miller aloud. The revelation was devastating. Rick, the man who had tortured Oswald, who had participated in his humiliation and suffering, was Hope's biological father. The child he had found again and vowed to protect was the daughter of the man who had betrayed him. "Rick is Hope's father," murmured Oswald, still processing the information. "And from what you told me about him, he doesn't seem like someone who deserves to know this information," said Dr. Miller firmly. Oswald got up and walked to the window, watching Hope play innocently in the garden. She knew nothing about her true origin, about the violent man who had fathered her, about the complications that this revelation could bring. "There's more," continued Dr. Miller. "I also found correspondence between your mother and a lawyer. Apparently, Rick tried to claim Hope's paternity when she was 2 years old. And what happened? Your mother managed to keep the adoption legal, but Rick never completely gave up. The letters suggest that he still had an interest in the girl, probably for financial reasons." Oswald felt a wave of nausea. "Do you think Rick knew who Hope was when he tortured me?" "It's possible," admitted Dr. Miller. "And if he finds out that she's alive and living with you..." The implication was terrible. Rick could try to use Hope as leverage, or worse, he could try to take her away claiming paternal rights. "No one can know about this," said Oswald with determination. "Hope is my sister in every way that matters. I won't let that man destroy her life again." It was at that moment that they heard voices coming from the garden. Brenda was talking to someone, her voice showing nervousness. Oswald and Dr. Miller ran to the window and saw a scene that made their blood run cold. Rick was standing at the gate talking to Brenda, his eyes fixed on Hope, who was playing just a few feet away. "How dare he come back here?" murmured Oswald, his voice filled with anger. "Oswald, you need to be very careful now," warned Dr. Miller. "If he suspects that Hope is his daughter—" But it was too late for precautions. Rick had pushed the gate open and entered the garden. Hope looked at him with innocent curiosity, not recognizing the man who had tortured Oswald. "Hello, little one," said Rick in a falsely gentle voice. "What's your name?" Hope recoiled instinctively, sensing something threatening in the man's presence. Brenda positioned herself between them, but Rick pushed her aside. "Get out of the way, Brenda. I want to talk to the girl." It was then that Hope did something that surprised everyone. She looked directly at Rick and, in her voice still weak but clear, said, "You hurt Oz." The recognition in Rick's eyes was immediate and terrifying. He had realized not only that the girl recognized him, but also something deeper, a resemblance that awakened long-buried memories. "My God," he whispered, kneeling in front of Hope. You are..." Oswald ran out of the house, Dr. Miller right behind him. But when they reached the garden, Rick was already holding Hope by the arm, his eyes shining with a mixture of recognition and greed. "Let her go now," shouted Oswald. Rick turned to him with a cruel smile. "You didn't tell me you had found my daughter, brother." The word brother sounded like a slap. Oswald realized that all his worst suspicions had been confirmed. Rick knew exactly who Hope was, and now had returned to claim what he believed was his. "She's not your daughter," said Oswald firmly. "She's my sister, legally adopted by our mother." "Adoption can be challenged," replied Rick, still holding Hope. "Especially when the biological father was excluded from the process illegally." Hope began to cry, scared by the argument and the way Rick was holding her. Her small voice called for Oswald, begging to be released. "Let her go," repeated Oswald, taking a step forward. "I won't let you hurt her." "Hurt?" laughed Rick. "She's my daughter. I have rights over her." It was then that Dr. Miller spoke up, his voice filled with medical and moral authority. "Rick, you abandoned this child when she was a baby. You have no moral rights over her, regardless of legal issues." "And who are you to have an opinion?" Rick roared. "I am the man who saved her from the flood when you didn't even know she was alive," replied Dr. Miller calmly. "I am the man who searched for her for months, trying to find her family. And I can testify that you never showed any interest in her well-being." The tension in the garden was palpable. Hope continued to cry, and Oswald knew he needed to act quickly before the situation completely escaped control. But what he didn't know was that this confrontation was being observed by eyes that would make everything even more complicated. The tension in the garden was interrupted by the sound of cars rapidly approaching on the road. Oswald felt his stomach sink when he recognized the vehicles. They were the same cars as Sergio and his men. But there was something different this time. More cars, more men, and an urgency that suggested bigger problems. "What the hell is happening now?" murmured Rick, still holding Hope by the arm. The girl had stopped crying, but her eyes showed absolute terror. Sergio got out of the first car, accompanied by 5 men this time, all with serious and determined expressions. When he saw Rick in the garden, his face contorted into an expression of surprise and recognition. "Rick Martin," said Sergio in a dangerously low voice. "How interesting to find you here." Rick paled instantly. "Sergio, I wasn't expecting to see you around here." "I'm sure you weren't," replied Sergio, approaching slowly. "Considering you owe us $100,000 and disappeared 3 months ago." Oswald looked between the 2 men, a new understanding dawning in his mind. The pieces of an even bigger puzzle began to fit together in a disturbing way. "You know Rick?" Oswald asked Sergio. "Know him?" Sergio laughed bitterly. "Rick is our former partner, the one who ran off with money that wasn't his and left us with huge losses." Dr. Miller positioned himself discreetly closer to Hope, prepared to act if necessary. The presence of more dangerous men had escalated the situation to levels that none of them had foreseen. "Sergio, I can explain," began Rick, his voice trembling. "I had some personal problems." "Personal problems," Sergio cut in. "You stole our money and disappeared. You left 2 of our men in jail because of your incompetence." Brenda watched the situation with growing horror. "Oswald," she whispered, "Rick didn't say he had debts with other people when he planned to torture you." The revelation made everything click in Oswald's mind. He wasn't just trying to extort me for sadism. He was desperate to get money to pay you. "Exactly," confirmed Sergio. "And when he didn't get what he wanted through torture, he decided to run like a coward." Rick squeezed Hope's arm tighter, making the girl whimper in pain. "Now I have something much more valuable than money," he said, a new dangerous determination in his voice. "What do you mean?" asked Sergio, confused. "This girl is my daughter," declared Rick, "and Oswald Fairbanks will pay very well to get her back." The silence that followed was deafening. Oswald felt his world crumble once again. Rick had not only discovered the truth about Hope, but now planned to use her as a bargaining chip to solve his own problems. "Interesting," murmured Sergio, studying the scene with calculating eyes. "A child can be very useful to ensure payments." "No," said Oswald firmly, stepping forward. "Hope is not part of this equation. Leave her out of it." "Ah, but she is exactly what makes everything more interesting," said Rick with a cruel smile. "You want your sister back? Pay my debt to Sergio, $100,000. Dr. Miller could no longer remain silent. "Rick, you abandoned this child when she was a baby. You have no moral or legal rights over her." "Yes, I do," Rick retorted, "and I can prove it. I brought documents that show I am her biological father." He pulled some papers out of his pocket with one hand, keeping Hope safe with the other. They were copies of the same documents that Dr. Miller had found, but Rick had specifically highlighted the parts that established his paternity. "Documents can be challenged," said Oswald desperately. "They can," agreed Sergio, "but that would take months in court. And during that time, where do you think the girl would stay?" The implied threat was clear. If Rick managed to raise doubts about Hope's custody, she could be temporarily placed in state custody, or worse, with him. Hope looked at Oswald with eyes that begged for salvation. Her little hands reached out to him, and she whispered in her weak voice, "Oz, help me." The plea broke Oswald's heart. He had promised to protect Hope, had sworn that he would never let anything bad happen to her again. But now he found himself in an impossible situation. "How long do I have to get the money?" he asked finally. 24 hours, replied Sergio. "And to make sure you don't try anything clever, Rick will take the girl with us as collateral." "No!" shouted Oswald. "She stays here." "She's coming with us," said Rick firmly. "She's my daughter, and I can take her wherever I want." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Hope, who had remained relatively quiet during the discussion, suddenly turned to Rick and spoke with a clarity that surprised everyone. "You're not my dad," she said, her voice small but determined. "My dad is in heaven with Mommy. You're just the bad man who hurt Oz." The girl's words had a powerful impact. Rick was visibly shaken, not expecting resistance from a 4-year-old. "You don't understand," he said, trying to maintain authority. "I'm your real father, the man who made you. Making baby doesn't make daddy," Hope replied with a wisdom surprising for her age. "Daddy is who takes care of you, who protects you, who loves you. You just hurt." Dr. Miller watched the scene with growing admiration. The girl was demonstrating extraordinary emotional strength, facing her own fears to protect the family she had chosen. Sergio, who had observed the exchange in silence, made a comment that again changed the dynamic. Rick, it seems your daughter doesn't recognize you as her father. That could complicate your legal plans. She's just a confused child, protested Rick. With time, she'll understand. With time, interrupted Sergio, our patience will run out. $100,000, Rick, one way or another. Oswald realized that there was an opportunity in the tension between Rick and Sergio. What if I offered an alternative? He said. What kind of alternative? Asked Sergio, interested. Rick owes me much more than money, said Oswald carefully. He tortured me, tried to extort me, broke into my property. If he gives up any claim on Hope, I'll pay off his debt to you. Interesting, murmured Sergio. But that doesn't solve our trust problem with Rick. Then do whatever you want with him, said Oswald coldly. Just leave Hope out of it. Rick realized he was losing control of the situation. In desperation, he squeezed Hope's arm even tighter and backed towards the cars. No one is going to tell me what to do with my own daughter, he shouted. But it was then that the situation took a completely unexpected turn. Brenda, who had remained silent for most of the discussion, stepped forward and made a statement that left everyone in shock. Rick, do you really want to know who Hope's real father is? Brenda's words echoed through the garden like thunder. Everyone present, Oswald, Rick, Sergio and his men, Dr. Miller, stood completely still, processing what she had just insinuated. What do you mean by that? Asked Rick, his voice trembling between anger and confusion. His grip on Hope's arm loosened slightly. Brenda took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she prepared to reveal a secret she had kept for 4 years. You were never Hope's biological father, Rick. The birth certificate you have is forged. The silence that followed was deafening. Oswald looked at Dr. Miller, who seemed as surprised as he was. Hope watched Brenda with her big eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but feeling that it was something important. That's impossible, said Rick, but his voice sounded less confident now. I have the documents, I have proof. You have documents that I myself forged 5 years ago, confessed Brenda, tears beginning to stream down her face. Because I was desperate to protect the truth. Sergio watched the revelation with growing interest, realizing that the situation was taking turns that could significantly affect his business. Explain better, he ordered. Brenda looked at Oswald with an expression of silent pleading, as if asking forgiveness for what she was about to reveal. Hope's biological mother was Marina Santos, a young woman who worked in the administration of the mining company. She had a relationship with someone in the Fairbanks family. Oswald felt his world begin to tremble again. With whom, Brenda? With your father, she whispered. Hope is your father's daughter, Oswald. She's your real sister, not adoptive. The revelation hit Oswald like lightning. All the times he had felt an inexplicable connection with Hope, all the similarities he had noticed but couldn't explain, now made perfect sense. But why forge the documents putting Rick as the father? Asked Dr. Miller, trying to understand the logic behind the lie. Because Marina was terrified, explained Brenda. She was young, single, and had become involved with a married and powerful man. When she found out she was pregnant, her father threatened to kill her if she revealed who the real father was. Rick completely released Hope's arm, staggering back as if he had been punched. So she never was. You were never anyone's father, confirmed Brenda brutally. I forged the documents putting your name because you were desperate for money at the time and agreed to be listed as the father in exchange for a few bucks that Marina managed to scrape together. Hope took advantage of the confusion to run towards Oswald, who picked her up protectively. The girl clung to him as if her life depended on it, whispering, I knew you were my real brother. How did you know? Asked Oswald, moved. Because when you hug me, I feel the same as when Mommy hugged me, she replied with touching simplicity. Real family has the same smell of home. Sergio, who had observed the entire revelation, now addressed Rick with an expression of absolute disgust. So you not only robbed us, but also lied about having a daughter to use as a bargaining chip. I thought she was really my daughter, Rick stammered. The documents. Documents that you knew were questionable from the beginning, Sergio cut in. You agreed to be listed as the father for money, then tried to use that to blackmail innocent people. Dr. Miller approached Brenda. Why did you decide to tell the truth now? Because I can no longer see hope being used as a bargaining chip, she replied, wiping away her tears. She has already suffered too much in her life. She deserves to grow up knowing who she really is and where she belongs. Oswald looked at Hope in his arms, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration for the girl who had faced so many adversities with such courage. And our mother knew the truth, he asked Brenda. She knew, she confirmed. She was the one who asked Marina to give the child up for adoption, promising that she would take care of Hope as her own daughter. But when Marina passed away during childbirth, your mother decided to raise Hope as your sister, not as your husband's secret daughter. To protect his memory, Oswald understood. And to protect you too, added Brenda. She didn't want you to grow up knowing that your father had betrayed the family. Sergio had lost patience with the whole family situation. That's very touching, he said sarcastically, but I still have $100,000 to collect from Rick. And I still don't have that money, admitted Rick miserably. Then we have a problem, said Sergio, signaling for his men to approach. It was at that moment that Dr. Miller did something completely unexpected. Sergio, he said with authority, before you make any drastic decisions, perhaps you should know that this entire conversation is being recorded. Everyone present looked at him surprised. Dr. Miller took a small digital recorder out of his shirt pocket. I recorded everything, he said calmly. The confessions of torture, the threats, the attempts at extortion. Everything is documented here. Sergio advanced threateningly. Give me that recorder now. I can't do that, replied Dr. Miller. But I can make a proposal that benefits everyone. What proposal? You let Rick resolve his debt by working for you without violence. In exchange, I won't hand this recording over to the authorities. And why would you do that? Asked Sergio suspiciously. Because I've been a doctor for 40 years, replied Dr. Miller. I've seen too much violence, too much suffering. I prefer to solve problems in a way that no one else gets hurt. Oswald watched the doctor with growing admiration. Dr. Miller wasn't just protecting Hope. He was trying to save all of them from consequences that could destroy their lives. Besides, continued Dr. Miller, Oswald really does have valuable contacts in the mining industry. A legitimate partnership would be much more profitable for you than debt collection. Sergio considered the proposal for a long moment. Rick works for us until he pays off the debt, he said finally. Oswald provides us with information about mining contracts as a minority partner, and this doctor keeps his mouth shut about everything he heard here. And Hope? Asked Oswald. The girl is no longer our problem, said Sergio. Never was, actually. Rick looked around the garden, realizing that he had completely lost control of the situation. He no longer had Hope as a bargaining chip. He had no way to escape his debt, and now he would have to face the consequences of his actions. One last thing, said Dr. Miller firmly. Rick formally relinquishes any claim on Hope, forever. I relinquish, murmured Rick, defeated. Say it, looking at her, ordered Dr. Miller. Rick looked at Hope, who was safe in Oswald's arms. I relinquish any right to you. You're not my daughter, and I'm not your father. Hope looked at him with a surprising maturity for her 4 years. I forgive you, she said simply, but I don't want to see you again. With that, the crisis had finally come to an end. But there was still one last revelation that would change everything forever. 6 months had passed since that tumultuous day in the garden of the mansion. Autumn had arrived in Harmony Creek with its golden colors, painting the mountains around the small town with tones of hope and renewal. Life in Oswald's house had found a peaceful rhythm that none of them had experienced before. Hope, now almost 5 years old, had blossomed in ways that surprised everyone daily. Her voice, once hesitant and weak, now filled the house with crystalline laughter and lively conversations. She had started attending a local school, where she quickly became beloved by teachers and classmates for her natural kindness and precocious wisdom. Dr. Miller continued to be a constant presence in the family's life, not only as a doctor, but as the grandfather figure that Hope had never had. Every afternoon, he came to visit them, bringing children's books and stories of the region that fascinated the girl. Brenda had transformed completely. Free from the weight of the secrets she had carried for years, she had stopped drinking and devoted herself entirely to taking care of the house and supporting Oswald in raising Hope. The dynamic between them had evolved into something like a real family, based on mutual respect and shared love for the girl. Oswald had managed to transform the forced agreement with Sergio into a genuinely profitable business partnership. His mining company had grown significantly, but he always prioritized time with Hope above any financial gain. Rick had disappeared from their lives completely. According to the latest information they received, he was working in a mine in the interior of another state, fulfilling his agreement with Sergio silently and without creating problems. On that special Saturday morning, Hope woke up with a different energy. It was the day of the town's fall festival, a local tradition that she was eager to experience for the first time as part of a real family. "Oswald!" she shouted, running to her brother's room still in her flowered pajamas. "Today is the day of the festival." Oswald picked her up, spinning her around the house while she laughed gleefully. "Yes, little one. And you're going to wear the new dress we bought especially for today." The dress was light blue, with small yellow flowers embroidered by hand, a choice of Hope that had reminded everyone of the blanket she loved so much. Brenda had spent weeks adjusting every detail to make it perfect. During breakfast, Dr. Miller arrived, bringing a special surprise. "Hope," he said with a mysterious smile, "I brought something very important for you." She looked curious as he pulled an official envelope from his medical bag. "What is it, Dr. Miller?" "These are the final papers for your legal adoption," he announced solemnly. "Now you are officially Hope Fairbanks, Oswald's sister in every sense of the law." Hope's eyes filled with tears of joy. Even at only 4 years old, she understood the importance of that moment. Never again could anyone question her place in that family. "Does that mean you're my brother forever?" she asked Oswald. "Forever, and then some," he replied, hugging her tight. The fall festival was in full swing when they arrived at the town square. Colorful banners decorated every street, the smell of apple cider donuts perfumed the air, and the sound of country music echoed through the brick buildings. Hope was fascinated by everything: the traditional dances, the booths selling crafts, the hayride offering tours of the area. It was a world of joy and tradition that she had never experienced. "Can I go on the hayride?" she asked, watching other children enjoying the activity. "Of course," said Oswald, "but I'm going with you." Hand in hand, brother and sister climbed aboard the wagon, following the tradition that asked for prosperity and protection for the family. When they returned, Hope shouted with pure joy. It was during the festival that something extraordinary happened. Hope was playing with other children when she approached Oswald with a serious expression. "Oswald," she said, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, little one. You can tell me anything." "I always knew you were my real brother," she confessed. "Even when I couldn't remember right, my heart knew." "How did you know?" "Because when I was very scared on the streets, I sometimes dreamed of a big boy who took care of me. And when I saw you for the first time in the basement, I recognized you from my dreams." Oswald felt a wave of intense emotion. "And now? Are you still afraid of anything?" Hope shook her head convincingly. "I'm not afraid of anything when I'm with you, with Aunt Brenda and with Dr. Miller. You are my real family." As the festival continued around them, Dr. Miller approached the brother and sister. "Oswald," he said discreetly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I recently discovered about our town." What is it, Doctor? I've discovered that there are at least a dozen orphaned or abandoned children living on the streets of Harmony Creek and neighboring towns, he revealed. Children like Hope was, needing family and care. Oswald looked at his sister, who was playing happily with other children, and then at the mansion on the hill, with its many empty rooms. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "That perhaps we can expand our family," said Dr. Miller softly. "Give other children the same chance that Hope had. Become a foster home? Or permanent, depending on the circumstances. You have resources, I have medical contacts, Brenda has experience caring for children. Together, we could make a real difference." Hope, who had overheard the conversation, ran back to them. "Are you talking about bringing other children home?" "Yes," replied Oswald. "Children who need a family, like you needed." Hope's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "I'd love to have brothers and sisters. I can teach them how to draw birds." The decision was made at that moment, under the stars of the fall festival, with the sound of laughter and country music echoing through the historic town. In the months that followed, Oswald's mansion transformed into something much bigger than a house. It became a true home for children who had lost hope. Dr. Miller coordinated the medical and legal aspects, Brenda managed the day-to-day running of the house, and Oswald provided financial and emotional stability. Hope proved to be a natural older sister, helping each new child to adapt, sharing her own experiences of trauma and healing, and always offering the same unconditional love that she had received. A year after that fall festival, the house housed 8 children of different ages and histories, all united by the love of the family they had chosen each other to be. The walls that once echoed with loneliness and pain now vibrated with laughter, lively conversations, and the constant sound of little feet running through the corridors. Hope, now 6 years old and more mature than her age suggested, often sat in the garden, where she had once witnessed violence and fear, drawing happy families and colorful birds flying free through the blue sky of West Virginia. "Oswald," she said one golden afternoon, "do you remember when you asked me if I was afraid of anything?" "I remember," he replied, sitting down next to her on the grass. "Now I know what my biggest fear is," she said thoughtfully. "What is it?" "My fear is that other children around the world are still suffering like I suffered, without knowing that there are families like ours waiting to love them." Oswald hugged his sister, knowing that she had grown to become exactly the kind of person the world needed. Someone who transformed pain into compassion, fear into courage, and loneliness into love. As the sun set over the mountains of Harmony Creek, painting the sky with tones of hope, the Fairbanks family knew that their individual stories of suffering had transformed into something bigger. A promise that true love can heal the deepest wounds, and that family is not defined by blood, but by choice, care, and mutual dedication. And so, in the small town in West Virginia where everything began with cries of pain, now echoed only the laughter of children who had found their way back home. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.